And then there was one which is somewhere in the middle of that, which was kind of like the heavy black ink, kind of Mike Mignola-esque Francesco Francavilla, which is somewhere in between the other two.
Yeah.
And then there was a version of that which was just black and white, no colour. And we ended up with the Mike Mignola Francavilla kind of Crom, Dave Gallagher sort of hodgepodge art style.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, a unique podcast where I delve into the minds of creatives in the tabletop gaming space. I'm here to uncover their creative process and inspirations driven by my passion for understanding who they are and why they create. Enjoy this interview with Ben Alexander, the creator of the solo RPG Ironheart and the illustrator behind the RPG Shiver. We talk about how his art and gaming intersected to bring him where he is now, how a coworker led him into illustrating in the gaming space, and how he created a solo RPG that's currently up on BackerKit. Okay, please sit back, relax, pull out your sketch pad, and enjoy my time with Ben.
Hey everyone, this is Watt. When I'm not making Cloud Empress, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. My guest today is Ben Alexander. Ben is an illustrator and designer from Hull, East Yorkshire. Listeners know my obsession with his work. I sang his praises during my interviews with the brothers behind the Shiver RPG. His art was the first magnet that attracted me to that game. So Ben, welcome to the third floor.
Hi Craig, great to be here.
And that and that little intro is true. When I was talking, I think it was to Charlie. He asked me off mic. He's like, "How did you find us?" And I couldn't remember, but what I do remember is going, "That looks cool," and seeing your art. And then I ended up diving in, and then it was horror, which I absolutely love. So at this point, Ben, what I usually do is talk about your gamer origin story. But I have you on for two different reasons here. One, your association with games, but also you as an artist. So I think what I want to do is start with your artist origin story. So, and that's a little tougher, right? Because for a lot of people who are in the visual arts, it started before you even thought about it. So I guess maybe what I'd like to do is go to the moment when you first realized I like this and I might be good at it. Do you remember? Can we go back to that moment?
Yeah, totally. So quite luckily, my kind of art and gaming kind of origin stories are fairly interlinked. So
beautiful.
Hopefully quite a smooth running one. Yeah, I guess like one of my first memories was like watching the animated X-Men TV show in the 90s and like trying to draw the characters and like trying to draw like Star Wars characters and stuff because we had a VHS rip of the the original trilogy, and just sort of like trying very kind of like very very like childish attempts at recreating like R2D2 and things like that. But then kind of like where that intersects with my gaming story is like a lot of people probably in the UK, my first exposure to tabletop gaming was Games Workshop and Warhammer.
Sure.
Most, in the UK, most large towns or cities have a Games Workshop or a store that sells, Warhammer miniatures in, and that's kind of probably when I was about 7 or 8 years old, walking past one of those stores with my parents, and I got sucked in by like the kind of amazing models. And then kind of over time, they've got the amazing like rule books, just for audio listeners, holding up one here. And yeah, I just kind of, I love the art style of it. Just like the kind of creation and like the passion and the kind of depth of that, those artworks was incredible, and kind of over time became the thing that I was more involved in than like the tabletop wargaming side of things. Like to me, I feel like the early mid 2000s Games Workshop, the art department there is pretty much untouchable. Like just the caliber of like, the artwork, like it's people who, if they'd have been born a few hundred years ago, we talk about them in the same way we talk about like Rembrandt or Caravaggio.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Evocative. The art was so evocative. It just made both the fantasy and the 40K world just come alive. So I could not agree more.
Exactly. Like, people like Carl Kapinski and Paul Dainton, kind of before what we sort of, come to expect now with these like amazing like concept art books, things like that for films and video games. They were doing this stuff in like the late 90s with the kind of same kind of cinematic, kind of artistic fidelity, using oil paints, which is like incredible. Like some of the stuff that Paul Dainton does is just like unbelievable. So yeah, that kind of, I went through periods of, again, trying to recreate those things with like inks and like acrylic paints, and maybe didn't quite succeed. But that's always something I've always loved. And I kind of did the thing that a lot of people seem to do with like Warhammer is, take it up for a bit. You get really into it as a teenager. Then when you hit maybe like between 16 and 18, maybe drop it for about 10 years and then pick it back up again in the late 20s. For me, that was at the start of the pandemic. Everyone was inside. You needed something to do. Painting little toy figures was a good pastime. And in the intervening years there, I kind of got into tabletop role-playing game a little bit. D&D and the Age of Empire Star Wars one. That's kind of when through a winding path kind of led me towards the Shiver kind of side of things, which is what I'm largely here to talk about.
Yeah. So quick question. Now, were you actively drawing and creating in that timeline there, right? So we kind of went to teenage Ben. We've fast forwarded to adult Ben. Were you an illustrator during all of that time, or did the pandemic also bring you back to the art side of it as well?
Yeah, so I think since I've just always drawn, like, even in that time, like it was, when I kind of like gave up the Warhammer thing, that was a similar time when I kind of went to do a foundation kind of art course at before university. So that's something that some people do. They'll do a year at an art college, and then they do 3 years at university. So at that time, at that foundation course, it allows you to kind of explore a few kind of different avenues of creativity. So that could be like fashion design, photography, graphic design, textiles. I think there's like sculpture, fine art in there. So you kind of get a few months where you try out a bit of those things. And I was torn between illustration and graphic design. I ended up going down the graphic design route, but illustration was always something that I did on the side, and I always loved, and had just continued for like, decades at this point until it has now become my job.
Yeah. So talk to me about the gravity there, Ben. So when you're at that first year and you've got all of these different ways to express yourself and to explore, what do you think was the illustration and graphic design gravity well? Why there?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I just like the idea of, there's a kind of a few things here. So I listened to your interview with Tim Denny, which was a really good one. I felt a lot of kind of like kinship with him and a lot of kind of parallels, like kind of talking about being very introverted as a kid. And, then he went into graphic design and visual communication in a similar way that I did. Yeah. I think for me, kind of like part of it was, I was very shy, very introverted, but artwork allowed me to, that'd take attention away from me, or that'd be, allow me to speak without having to be the one who's kind of under scrutiny. It was the artwork. I think that was something that I always quite liked. And just like the joy of creating something, just the joy of making something and then when it's finished, having it in front of you and you being able to very quickly and cleanly show that that's the thing you've done. And that's the end product, I think. So,
and you may not know this, Ben, but you're talking to a very underaccomplished artist right now. So I have always loved drawing, always have loved illustration. I'm terrible at both, but it's never stopped me from enjoying it. Right.
That's fine. But also, like, it's subjective. Like, if you love it, you should carry on.
Well, and I'm a firm believer, that the difference between you and me is the time. you have put in the time, I haven't, right? I think that's significant. But one of the things that has happened to me, and I really want to know whether this happened to you as well, is I was the same kid drawing comic books and stuff when I was a kid, copying what I saw and kind of cheating. So I wouldn't trace them, right? But I would mimic and not really drawing what I thought I saw, not drawing what I was seeing, if that makes any sense, right?
Yeah, I totally know that. Yeah.
And then at one point, and I think it was the Marvel book, Draw the Marvel Way, was my first exposure to like everything is a shape and everything has a structure, and it blew my mind, and I kind of had to start all over again. Did that happen to you where you realized, wait a minute, I need to go backwards. I need to start all over again? And when did that happen to you?
Yeah, totally. So I think that probably will have been when I was about like 15, 16, 17. Like a couple of like examples of that is one of them. So it wasn't the Drawing the Marvel Way, but Brian Hitch, the artist for the Ultimates. Yeah, he had a book where that was kind of like him talking about his process, and I got hold of that, and I was like, oh my god, like you can draw like this, like you can draw these Hollywood action scenes in comic form. So that was really cool. And then also I was very lucky. The school I was at offered, once you reach a certain age through art and design class, offered life drawing classes through their connection to the art college, like in the city centre, which is where I ended up going to. So then I started going to that for once a week for a few months with a few of my friends from my class. And that was just revolutionary, like for me, stop trying to just draw the outlines of things, like break it down into kind of 3-dimensional shapes, look at the proportions, and then kind of it was things like exercises where they got you to draw almost like the cross sections of things, so that you kind of understood the kind of like the volume and the kind of the weight of different parts of the body. But yeah, I think that was a massive thing for me. And also learning to not just constantly erase, like use a rubber to go over things, like being able to kind of put your marks down and stick with them and have that confidence to do that, which I still struggle with today. That's why I work digitally now, because it's so easy to like undo things. But yeah.
Well, and the other thing, because I have probably in the last year and a half have gotten a tablet and have started working digitally, because I've always been paper, right? And the layers changes everything. Right? Can't do that with paper, right? And it's revolutionary. So there was a God, I really should know who this was or is. This person's alive, and he's a famous comic book artist. I can't remember his name, but he said, quote, I'm going to paraphrase, is, I don't know how to, people ask me how I draw different perspectives. I don't know how to draw different perspectives. I just know how to spin the box. Which I thought was a really kind of like eye-opening way. Even if you're not an artist, it makes you kind of realize, how that all works.
I've not heard that before. That's great though.
It's good, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And for me, it helps me because I can very quickly get out of that and forget what I'm doing. When do you start to find yourself drawing more digitally? And did you go there voluntarily? Did you get dragged there by, what the market's asking for? When did you start moving in that direction?
So this leads us very neatly into Shiver, because this is inextricably linked with kind of like my work on Shiver. So I kind of like my kind of involvement with Shiver as a game started in 2019, because Barney, who's one of the Menzies brothers,
he's been on the show, yep.
Yeah, he, I worked with his partner. She mentioned that,
isn't that funny?
I know, yeah. It's so I worked with his partner, and she mentioned that he, is working on like a game. She was like, "Oh, it's like Dungeons and Dragons," and I was like, "Oh, I know a bit about that." And she was like, "Oh, yeah, they're thinking of doing a Kickstarter campaign," and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Like, I could do like a poster or something for that."
Unbelievable.
So then, like, there's a lot of things that happen in between then in 2020 it really starts to ramp up. I'm working on shit. The pandemic happens. I get put on furlough from my job, so I basically have nothing to do all day.
Wow.
And then we start working on Shiver with more intensity. And to start with, I was working a mix of traditional and digital media. So I'd work in pencil, scan it in,
Right.
then print it out, go over ink, scan that in again, take it into Photoshop, color it. If something's gone really badly wrong, I might print it out again and work over the top of it, and then back into Photoshop. It turned out that that's a very not a very efficient way to work. So we go back, and basically I decide to take it all digital. I buy a little graphics tablet to plug into my Mac, and my little tiny little Mac that I had at that time. And then then at that point, it's from like early 2020, it started just being all digital. And then kind of sort of grew from there. We went from a little plug-in tablet to an iPad, which I draw on now, and then went from drawing in Photoshop to drawing in Procreate, which I find way better user interface and a lot easier to use and way cheaper as well. For any artist listening, just go Procreate. It's like less than £10, one payment.
It's insane.
All the tools you need. Yeah.
How hard was that for you though, Ben? How hard was it for you? Because God, like I viscerally felt your routine with the scanning and
yeah. I don't know why I did it. It was such a terrible idea.
I do this because it comes back to what I was just talking about earlier, I think, Ben, which is familiarity and time. Yeah. You had invested time to get good at drawing on paper, right? And I don't care what anybody says. There's a huge difference in the mediums that you use, and pencil and paper and digital tablet and digital pen are two different mediums. And I want to ask a little bit about that though, Ben. So how steep was that learning curve when you finally said, like, this is stupid what I'm doing. I need to do this all digital. Was at any point, was it demoralizing? Did you regret that decision at certain points? Like, can you help me understand? Because I've struggled with it and I'm really interested, like, how it was for you to kind of get off and go digital. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. No, that's a really good question. So part of the struggle, I think just before I committed to going fully digitally, I already owned a little tablet and I was using that to do the coloring. So I had like some kind of conception of how to kind of use that. But the main problem I had was because I got a little tablet that plugs into a Mac that doesn't have a display by itself.
Right.
There's this kind of weird hand-eye coordination disconnect thing. So my hand's doing one thing, but I'm looking straight ahead. I'm not looking at where my hand is. And that was really tricky to kind of get used to. And honestly, that was just practice. Practice looking at different brush settings, looking at different kind of mouse sensitivities so that the kind of when you're moving your hand, it moves in the way you want. So that was tricky. And then ultimately I kind of came to the conclusion about maybe a year and a half later that was, it got to the point where that was holding me back. That kind of, the hand-eye coordination thing. So I got an iPad where I would be drawing directly onto the kind of display. So where the nib of the pen was going was directly correlating to what I saw on screen. That was the main thing for me. I kind of, because of in terms of the software, that was relatively easy because I worked using the Adobe suite for a few years, graphic design degree, worked as a graphic designer for a few years. So the software was relatively easy for me, but it was more the physical act of doing it that was tricky.
Shiver has a very distinctive style and look to it. I think it is a huge part of what defines the game. Outside of even the mechanics or anything, I really, it tells me what the game feels like. And it's very unique. And a question I have for you is, am I looking at Ben's style or am I looking at Shiver's style when I go through the Shiver book?
Man, you're coming up with some banger questions, Greg. This is really good. So I don't know. It's weird because all of this stuff is all kind of like intertwined. It's like
Right.
the Warhammer stuff links to the gaming stuff, to the drawing stuff, to the graphic design stuff, to the Shiver stuff. It's like it's all kind of a web of. So I guess like for me to try and make sense of this is kind of like explaining what the actual process was behind creating the Shiver look for Shiver.
So let's do this then, Ben. Let's take a quick break and let's do exactly that. So let's talk about how we got there. So guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk about how do we go from a blank screen or a blank page all the way there. We're going to use Shiver as the example. And of course, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, the methods for crafting their creations. We're going to crack open Ben's skull and we're going to try to figure out how the hell he makes that beautiful art. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Sam Dunewald, and I'm here to tell you about Dice Exploder, my tabletop RPG design podcast where each week I take a single game mechanic and break it down with a friend. Come listen to me talk to Alex Roberts about love and pity, John Harper about elegance and layout, and Mikey Ham about, what else? Exploding dice! It's Dice Exploder, breaking down RPG design one mechanic at a time. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
So I was talking to my wife this morning, Ben, and like I've had Tim Dene on, right, who's a visual artist. I've had another illustrator on as well. And podcast isn't the best forum necessarily to talk about visual arts, but it's still the same type of creative process. So let's go back in time a little bit, because I asked you a real tough question about, is it Ben's style for Shiver? Is that Shiver became Ben's style? That's a tough one, right? So let's go to, what was your first big piece for Shiver?
Ooh,
so if we were to go back, I take my daughter to the Ben Alexander Museum. We go to the Shiver exhibit. What is one of the first few pictures that we'll see that you say this is when we figured out what Shiver looks like?
Cool. So I think one of the first pictures would be very early on in the process when we were trying to nail the art style down. We kind of selected two characters who could represent the sorts of things you'd see in the game. So one of them was sort of like a high school jock with like a baseball bat player character, and another one would be a werewolf, so an enemy, a monster. Kind of got the posing for those down and then experimented with probably like broadly, I'd say 4 very distinct art styles for each of those. So
walk me through it.
Yeah, cool. So each of those kind of like, a very distinct visual approach. So one of them was very kind of like cartoony, very clean lines, very kind of like anime, very, very digital, flat colors, cell shaded type things. One of them was the totally opposite end of the spectrum, incredibly rough, scratchy, textured, gritty, kind of ink splatter. Inking was all over the place, very brush strokes. If you know the comic artist Jock, it was kind of like that sort of thing. And then there was one which is somewhere in the middle of that, which was kind of like the heavy black ink, kind of Mike Mignola-esque Francesco Francavilla, which is somewhere in between the other two. Yeah. And then there was a version of that which was just black and white, no color. And we ended up with the Mike Mignola Francavilla kind of Crom, Dave Gallagher sort of hodgepodge art style that we've ended up with now. So what you would see in the gallery would be a high school jock with a bicycle chain and a baseball bat and a werewolf side by side with really heavy dark shading and block colors.
Ah, so cool. So you said this is where we ended up, but there's a ping pong that happens between you and the brothers, right? So when you, and tell me if this is not how it happened, when you presented these 4 styles to them, did you know which one was working? Or did they pick one different than you picked? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of whether, did you put 4, but you kind of knew it was just one? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think again this is kind of like linked, kind of comes in with the working in design agency side of things. Is like it wasn't just these illustrations. I put together like a presentation for them, which included like mood boards. Like that was a big thing. Is like, you know, if you're working at a design agency, you work on like a branding project, you'll not everywhere is the same, but you'll tend to put together a mood board of like, okay, here are competitors, here are things we like that we think fit the tone we think we're going for. So I had a few of those, and then we had, as part of that, I had the illustrations. Shiver generally has been like very collaborative all the way through, but I wasn't sure which one we would pick. I think I presented this to Barney in a pub. Like, I think it was just like after work. Like, I was like, oh, I've printed these off like in the office printer, and yeah, and here's, you know, what do you think? And I can't remember if it was kind of decided then and there, or like, I know he will have gone away, like talked to Charlie about it as well, but I'm not sure. I don't know if I hadn't had a solid idea of where I thought it was going to go either. But I'm very happy with how it's kind of turned out, I suppose.
At all a challenge to now have defined the look and feel of Shiver to maintain that, right? Because you're always changing and growing as an artist, right? The person who is drawing Shiver today is not the guy who drew it and showed it to Barney, right? You're a very different artist now than you were then. Is it challenging for it to still look like Shiver? And are you sneaking in your progress as an artist as you go?
Oh, that's a really good one. I think inherently there is going to be growth and change in like my kind of interest in art and like my development, and as my skill set grows, I'll want to push that and change in different ways. I think another thing is that we've made intentional decisions about the art style of each book as well. So I think we've got 4 books that have been released. We've got 2 more that are finished at the moment, will be released this year. And each of those, aside from the first 2, has a very distinct art style. I think like there's a few things that are kind of true for Shiver, like for every project we have, is that we have like the heavy black. We have some level of abstraction, so we never want it to be quite photoreal. The characters are always a little bit cartoony, which is, you know, my personal biases leaking in. Is like, that's what I like. That's kind of what I kind of enjoy. You know, I'm a big like anime fan, so there's a bit of the big eyes, kind of like quite soulful thing coming in there. But yeah, so like we have the dark blacks. We have like generally quite striking colors, and that's kind of, and by the fact that it's me who's doing it, there'll always be a through line, if that makes sense. But even when we've brought other people in, it tends to be people who we think, we look at their work and they're like, they get it already. So it's not too difficult to select. But yeah, it's interesting because like when I came to, I know I keep going on about the design side of things.
Well, it's a big part of it, Ben.
No, totally. But it's like I kind of approach this as a branding project. Like, to start with, is like, these are the rules. This is the visual language we're going to use. These are kind of like the boundaries we have, and yeah, and you know, that has changed. I think in the first book, you can definitely tell that I moved from using a mixture of mediums to start with to being digital later on. Mm-hmm. And there's a few pieces of work later on that I think drift from the original intention a little bit, where I've gone really skinny lines. I've added too many colors, too many tones, and it looks something a bit different than that. But, yeah. No, it's interesting. It's kind of constantly changing and evolving. It's like there is kind of a Shiver look, but it changes every time. Yeah. Like Shiver Gothic, Secrets of Spire Home, our kind of like vampire book. that has a specific color palette. It's got the kind of turquoise, dark blue, and this like really bright kind of orangey red. And that's the color palette for that book. For the next book, Shiver Gothic, Disciples of Dregstone, it's set underground. It's in this big subterranean tunnel system with like chemical waste and rat people. We've got a green, kind of lime green, yellow color palette. And on top of that, we've added a splatter texture, which appears on every piece of artwork that changes it a bit more. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. It makes total sense. So so one of the things that not just me, but the gaming world has recognized is that the beautiful cover for Shiver Gothic that got a lot of attention, and deservedly so. And there was a day where that didn't exist. So what I'd like to do is go back to that day. When does the art exist and then it becomes the cover, or is it we need a cover, we start working on it? Let's start there. What was the chicken? What was the egg?
Yeah, so for Gothic, it was definitely the interior artwork was there to start with. I think we started by designing some of the enemies, and some of the one of the ideas very early on was to introduce monster classes that players could play as. So It was creating those illustrations for those and for the enemies. And then a few months into the process, then we were like, okay, we need a cover. What's it going to be? So that kind of went through this kind of process of creating a lot of different options of like layouts for it. What I think quite early on we realized that we wanted the kind of the big baddie of the game, who's like the big bald vampire lady, to take center stage, and also a big red blood moon, because that's really cool. We were looking at things like Castlevania, but also Warhammer Fantasy, some great vampire art in that. We went through, I think there's 8 different layouts for the front of the book, like versions of where the characters are, what the characters are, and then we have the special edition cover, which is just very minimalist. We take that vampire character, we just have them in isolation, and that kind of came from the idea of like, we like special editions of books, they look amazing, and we just don't want it to be too busy, so just having that one figure in the center is just really nice and really beautiful, hopefully.
So let's go back to a blank screen. You've got your pencil in your hand, you've created a new project in Procreate, discussed and said, we kind of want, a vampire, the blood red moon, don't really do, Ben, just do your thing. Right. And you're standing there with this blank screen in front of you. How do you start because you got to start before you can get there, and you got to start and throw away. Like when you're staring at that blank screen and you have just a mood board in your head and just some vague direction, where do you go next? Where does that pencil hit, and what do you start doing?
Yeah, I guess the pencil. Yeah, we kind of start with like very small thumbnail images. So just making shapes, like so something that's maybe like an inch tall, just putting shapes down like, oh, that could be a head, that could be a person. Those, these really abstract, like tiny shapes. And then you kind of do a few of those. And then for me, you get progressively bigger and like, okay, we're going to refine that slightly. That's all it is the process of refinement is like blowing up, like making the lines thinner and more precise and making the canvas bigger proportionally, I think is kind of how we arrive there.
So it sounds to me like, Ben, like a big part of this then is where as much as what, right? So if you're drawing these thumbnails, is that what you're trying to evaluate is where are these things going to be and what looks good at a very large, arm's length away? Is that what's happening during the thumbnail process?
I guess it is. I've not thought about it in that way before, but you're totally right. Though it's more just being able to very quickly, assess the the kind of the layout of the shapes,
Right.
And what without going into a huge amount of detail of like, oh, this is what a head looks like, and this is kind of what the characters look like. It's more just working out the negative space and where that will sit on the page. But yeah, you're totally right though that. Thinking about in those terms of that's basically a kind of a preview of seeing that cover far away. That's a really good way of thinking about it.
Super fascinating for me. So, and real quick for those of you listening, and I'm going to link to some of these in the show notes. You know the routine. Scroll down; it's in the show notes. If you come into my living room, Ben, and just call first. But if you come into my living room, you'll see that I've got it all decorated with sketches. I'm very fascinated with especially the romantics, Da Vinci. I really love seeing the work before it's finished.
Yeah,
because of the art process. That's my passion. And don't get me wrong, like the finished product is amazing, but I love seeing that process. Right. And folks, I'm going to link to them. I don't know whose idea this was, whether it was yours or Barney's or Charlie's, but your time-lapsed work in progress videos, it's a little like whatever the views are right now, I guarantee I'm half of them, because it's so cool to watch that happen and watch you make decisions as you go. And you move a little here and you take this away. And it's absolutely fascinating. So I highly recommend for you guys to get a visual context of what Ben's talking about. You see it there. We start off shapes. We refine things. Things get more detailed, more refined. Then we go from the sketchy pencil to more inking, where you're making some commitments. This is where these lines are going to be. This is where the negative space is going to be. And then, the coloring really comes at last. When we look at that multi-stage process for you, what do you enjoy the least?
Whoa. That's a good one. What do I enjoy the least? I think generally it's going to be a very boring answer. It's like a lot of it is broadly. I enjoy it all. I really like my job. I'm really lucky to do it. But I think it does kind of change from illustration to illustration. Like there'll be some where I do I do the kind of pencils and then the inks, and then you're looking at the black and white illustration, and then the colors. You're like, oh. You select a couple that you think will look good, and then you're done in 10 minutes. And there'll be others where it's hours and hours and hours of work of just sort of like tweaking dials and just like looking at other people's artwork and trying to work out what they've done. And just like, how about if I just turn the whole image red and then have a few colors popping out? It's so I think coloring is not my least favorite, but probably the most difficult one I feel like. Yeah.
And why is it? Why do you think that is? Why is it there that you have had maybe the most frustrations or most challenges? What is it about that step versus all the other steps? Do you have a sense of that?
That's it. Yeah, I think one of the things that I think part of it maybe for me is that because of the nature of the game, it's a horror game, it has to be quite sinister, threatening, is we never particularly have anything that looks really bright. Like very, very little is lit by daylight. It all has to be very sinister, like relatively threatening. So I think that's sometimes that could be, most of the time the limitation is great. Like you kind of, those kind of creative constraints and limitations, I think you hear a lot of people say similar things that can be really good to kind of keep you on track. But sometimes that's it. It's like, okay, how do I show the scene but make it really dark but also dynamic? I think that can be kind of it. Making it so that colors are different kind of tones so they don't kind of look muddy and run into each other. Ultimately, it's, for whatever reason, I just really struggle with it, and it's probably something I could work on more. But I think different artists will kind of have their own kind of individual things.
No question. So, last question about this process, Ben, and then I want to talk about a few other things. When we get to the from the shapes to the committed lines, right? When the shapes become a leg, when the circle becomes a head. Famously, Rob Liefeld, comic book artist, would hide feet, put something always there because he hated drawing feet.
Yeah.
Shockingly, he wasn't bad at it, but for whatever reason, he became known as being bad at feet. But you go and find where he drew feet, it's actually pretty good.
Well, this is the weird thing about that is that Mignola does the same thing, but no one calls him out on it.
No one calls him out, right?
But,
do you have a part of, from an anatomy standpoint, that's a struggle with you? I conceptually understand hands. And when I see the process for hands, it makes total sense to me that the ring finger and the middle finger are tied to each other. And but man, oh man, it still continues to be tough for me. Is there an aspect of drawing something as familiar to us as a person that you struggle with the most, or did struggle with the most, and got over?
Yeah, I think historically I always struggled with legs and feet. Legs and feet are really weird. Because I don't know, I think it's definitely something I've got over. Like a couple of years ago, I did an online. Probably sounds quite bad as someone who was a professional illustrator at this point, but I did a big online drawing course to try and understand more about anatomy, and that really helped. That kind of gave one of the things I really liked about that, and also from the life drawing, is it kind of gave you rough measurements for how everything in the body, in a very kind of classical sort of traditional sense for what men and women look like, gives you rough kind of measurements for how big things should be. So for things like the hand, one of the things I really liked about that is if you draw a circle, which is the palm of your hand, your thumb comes out at the side just below halfway down where the hand is, and things like that. And then all the other fingers, you put a dot in the center, and then you basically have a radially go out with 4 lines, which are a certain length. Sorry, that's not really answered the question of what I struggle
it does. It does. And there's a couple insights here I want to talk about, Ben. One is, I totally get you saying, I'm struggling here. I'm going to go take a course on this, because I think we have to break it, because we've started down a path. That path is not getting us where we need to go.
Yeah.
And we can't just veer off from that path. And in some ways you have to stop and go backwards and start the journey again, which I think a course like that would definitely do. And your thing with a hand, dude, this is where I struggle as an artist very much. I don't know how this became about me, the artist. So everybody's here. Everybody's here to listen to you. but the hands is where I, for some reason, throw away the shapes in my head, and I draw what I think a hand looks like. And for the folks listening that don't draw, there's a concept that really has helped me a lot, which is this idea of drawing what you see, don't draw what you think you see.
Yeah.
And I don't know of a better way to do it, but you just talk. I've never thought about the radials on the fingers that you just talked about, and it kind of blew my mind. And I'm going to spend a lot of time drawing hands today.
That's the thing, though, is that ultimately is what it comes. There's other ways to think about it, but how I've kind of approached anatomy and things like that is, it is just I think it does come from that life drawing classes. Ultimately it's angles and shapes. Mm-hmm. Your body, there's the classical thing of the body is, for a man, is 8 heads high. You measure everything in heads, the top to the bottom of your head. You put head to the chin. The bottom of the next head comes down to your mid chest. Then your belly button, then your crotch, then 2 heads later, it's your knee. It is. I don't know. It kind of takes the romance out of it, and the kind of the thought of creative expression, because it can, it's kind of anatomy lessons. Sometimes as well, it's just good to use references. Just look at other people's pictures. I do that. I've got a massive folder of incredibly embarrassing pictures of myself that'll never see the light of day that kind of have formed the basis for a lot of the artwork in these books. And also looking at different artists, like looking at what artists do, which, from what you're saying, like useful for, looking at what I do, like in those videos is useful.
Yes.
And I do that for other people as well. Like I've really got an interest in not just like the kind of comic book style, but digital painting. I think that looks really cool. So I've been like watching a lot of process videos of that, because I've never like been a good painter. Like I don't really know how you go about it. So I've been trying to like look at what other people are doing. So you can, if you go on my Instagram, you see I've kind of been doing some fan art from like some weird like indie war games.
That's so cool.
So it's just a case of constantly like growing and like trying to analyze what you are and aren't good at, and just there's so many resources online which are really useful.
There really is. And people will say like, I can't draw, and I'm a firm believer that in reality it's just that you don't draw, because you can't draw. And like many things, whether it be learning to play guitar or, any type of artistic expression, it's a matter of doing it, and doing the work. It's not just this idea of someone is talented and they just pick up a pen and start drawing and it looks great. That's not how it works. And so I really try to hammer home to people, like a good friend of mine is a writer, is a professional writer. I always was the visual guy and he was always the wordy guy. Right. And I give him a ton of credit, because he just one day said, God damn it, I'm going to learn how to draw. And he just sat down with sketchbook after sketchbook every day, drawing every day, learning and going online and buying some books and he's become a pretty damn good artist. But that was because he put in hours of work. All right, Ben. So we're going to set Shiver aside, because for your sake, because I could literally talk about it for forever with you. I'm really enjoying this. And I want to, you made a huge mistake during the break and mentioned that there's something else that Parable and you are working on right now. And I would love to hear what that is.
Yeah, sure thing. So this is kind of like a bit of a leap for me, because not just am I doing the art for this, but it's a solo tabletop role-playing game that I've designed, laid out, and done the artwork for.
No shit.
It's a solo mech piloting RPG called Ion Core.
Hey, Future Craig here. Ben calls his new game Ion Core during this interview. It was recorded months ago and the name changed to Ion Heart. This game is beautiful and the link to check it out is in the show notes.
This is the first time anyone outside of Parable Games has heard about this. This is really exciting.
It is.
Yeah, so I'm a massive anime fan, and I like sci-fi things, and it was just kind of like a fun little side project for me to do outside of Shiver stuff. Tonally, it's very kind of it's a lot more gentle than Shiver, a lot more gentle than a lot of mech. Kind of like big robot fiction generally. Like it's notoriously a lot of the big kind of franchises names in that genre are meditations on human suffering. I didn't want to do that. I love Evangelion as much as the next person, but I'm just like, I don't need to do that, man. But yeah, so it's just kind of like, I'd say it's somewhere between Mass Effect meets like Gundam, The Witch from Mercury. So it's with a bit of Big Hero 6 thrown in, the Disney film. I wanted it to feel like piloting the mech was like piloting Baymax. It's just like these kind of big, kind of round, sleek kind of.
That's a hell of a pitch, dude. That's a hell of a pitch. So, oh my God, I could spend another 2 hours on this now.
No,
I'm not going to though.
Sunday, I've got nothing on.
So where, like, this is you scratching an itch, right? There's something that was bugging you and you had to get it out. And so where did that itch start to present itself? Was it the art that led? Like you started feeling a certain style? Was it watching some shit and going, God, I'd like to play with that a little bit? Or is it watching, frickin' Charlie, designing stuff and Barney making it playable, and you were like, I think I can do that too? Like, where does this itch start?
Yeah, I think definitely like watching shit and playing shit was a big part of it. So I said that like it's Mass Effect meets Gundam, which are like the two kind of like big, well-known names. More realistically, there's a book called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which is like a lovely science fiction book. It's great. It's so lovely. It's like reading a hug. It's really good. So very inspired by that. Like I think the conception of the book came out mid-pandemic, so pretty shit time. A lot of like, can I swear? Am I right to swear?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Fucking horrible time. And it was just kind of like there's things going on then, and it was just like something kind of escapist that was maybe a bit more optimistic, a bit more like hopeful. So yeah, reading like that book in the Wayfarers series. Also played an incredible JRPG called 13 Sentinels, which is like a mech visual novel that is somehow manages to be every single piece of sci-fi media ever created in one game. Like all of it, every single film you've ever seen in one game. Like I guess like watching Studio Ghibli films and watching like anime and playing like the Mass Effect games again. The Vision of Escaflowne, again, another incredible 90s mecha anime, fantasy mecha, but it's like romance, very lovely, very like, it's just a very like Shiver kind of caters to kind of like the grim dark, the like violent kind of side of things, and Ion Core is kind of like more it's like a YA novel, like it's more cutesy.
So cool.
Like, yeah.
So my next question, real quick, Ben, is how baked is this thing? Are we at the beginning stages, middle stages, late stages? Where are we in the process here?
I guess we'd say we're probably in the middle of it. So we're planning to release like sort of the alpha, like the early version of the game, like in the next couple of months through our Patreon, like part of the game. In terms of what's done, like the sort of the core gameplay mechanics are baked. But there will be some tweak in there. Art style and cover, that's hard baked. That I've got a lot of art for that. In fact, I don't know if I can. Yeah, I can send you something so you can have a little look potentially.
Let's go to our Discord chat. Pop it in there.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm so excited about it. So the reason I asked that question is that now I'm going to force you to come back when we're at or close to release, because I've never talked to game designer Ben before. And that's a completely different conversation. So, without me even asking and you saying, yes, we're going to do that, just so you know.
Amazing. Yeah. Cool. I'll send you a little look at what the cover is looking like.
Yeah, and what I'll do for those of you listening is I'll describe to you what I see. This will be first impressions. Holy shit. How cool is that?
The colors have come out a bit weird there. 1 second. Sorry. That's come out a little bit more neon than it is intended to be. There we go. That's what it looks like.
Isn't it amazing? All right. This is amazing. It's amazing how a slight change in the color tones, the tonality, totally changes everything that I'm just looking at right now. So for those of you at home listening, first off, Ben's description is perfect. Like everything you said, I'm seeing on the screen right now. It is, when we think about mechs, I'm so used to right angles and hard edges. And what I'm looking at right now is very much a Betamax, very much a Big Hero 6 feel and look to it. We've got a woman sitting in what looks to be like a couch chair coming out of the chest of this mech. The mech has a huge anime style sword, and oh God, your description was perfect, man. Your description was absolutely perfect. I really, really can't wait. All right, so last question about this because we're gonna have a whole episode about this when we get this.
Awesome.
farther down. What? And I promise this will be the only question. Was
No,
it
please,
always
please.
going to be solo?
Yes, for me, yeah. I again mentioned I'm very introverted, and the idea of DMing a kind of a game was quite scary. So I thought for the moment, designing a game that I'd want to play, and would also be very easy for me to play test. Was good. I think. Yeah, it's also worth saying this is very inspired by another like absolutely wonderful game called Colossal, which is I don't know if you've heard of that one. So basically, single player card uses deck of cards, kind of Studio Ghibli-esque castle exploration TTRPG, which is set in a world that is a castle that's so big it's got continents in it, and that's got a wonderful art style. It's a guy called Nick Angel, who I've had the chance to meet at a few conventions. I kind of like this. This had already was already brewing in my head at this point, but seeing that. I think to answer your earlier question, that kind of made me think, oh, wow, I could do something like that. So he's got a big shout out at the start of the book.
Great. That's great. The last little bit about this is what I really, because I was waiting with bated breath for the thing to come up. If you haven't figured it out, dude, I'm such a fan of your work.
Thanks, man.
What I love is that if somebody randomly had shown this to me, I think I would have ID'd you. Or ID'd.
Oh, really?
That's, yeah. And I think that's so cool. So this does not look anything like your Shiver work. But it's still, I can still see you in this, and it helps me answer the question that I asked a long time ago, which is how much is it Ben's style defines Shiver, or Shiver defines your style? And the thing I can't do, and I think it's just a limit of language, is I don't think I can tell you why. I don't think I can tell you why this looks familiar to me, even though stylistically it's very, very different than the other work that you've had. Holy shit, this is exciting. All right, we're gonna take another quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to kind of get into a little bit what we've talked around the edges here. I need to figure out what Ben's been grooving on. We'll be right back.
This is Sean. You may have heard of me from such movies as Brett and Sean Go to Illinois, 2 Motorcycles, 1 Stick of Dynamite, and Gaming and BS. What kind of RPG podcast is that? After my NFTs were stolen, I decided to become a patron of Third Floor Wars. The content is great and it costs me less than a good shot of liquor. So consider becoming a patron. It may just land you your next big role. Head over to patreon.com/Third Floor Wars. Tell Craig Sean sent ya.
This segment is, I have found for me, Ben, has been probably one of the more revealing segments when I talk to creators, because, none of us create in a vacuum. And, what I try to do in my podcast is try to understand the person, because I'm discovering the more I can understand the person, the more I understand what they're making. And it really informs the product for me and makes me, understand how something like the look of Shiver is created, and how something, that I love, where that comes from. And I learned that by spending time with you and learning about you. You're doing the same thing. So the way I am obsessed about your art style, you're obsessed about something too, and I want to hear about that. So is there anything recently, a show, a video game, role-playing game, a book, a comic, whatever it might be, that got its frickin' hooks into you, Ben, and just would not let go?
Yeah, so I think the example that is very prominent in my life at the moment is I've become very obsessed with a indie tabletop war game called Turnip 28. I don't know if you've
I've never heard of this. No,
okay.
Tell me.
So do you know anything about like the 28 movement, that kind of like
I don't think so.
No, cool. So it kind of evolves out of so John Blanche is incredible artist, kind of one of the art directors at Games Workshop. Artwork is this very kind of feverish, kind of like psychedelic nightmare artwork. People take that art style and they create miniatures that are very kind of in that realm. There's been a lot of games in this kind of this kind of art style. But the one that I'm into, Turnip 28, it's you use historical miniatures and you add stuff to them, you kit bash them. The idea of the world is that it's set in an alternate history where Napoleon loses the Battle of Austerlitz, and at the same time, parasitic root vegetables cover the entire planet, destroying the ecosystem, killing all the animals, and causing history to ground to a stop. Flash forward to 1,000 years later, you are controlling groups of kind of illiterate religious fundamentalists who still use Napoleonic weaponry, murdering each other in a swamp, and it's a horror comedy, historical war game where you control the least competent troops in history, and
amazing.
All the artwork, the rules, everything is amazing, and it's just a great kind of expression for me. Yeah.
Well, yeah, with the kit bashing right down to the kit bashing in the mouse. Now, so here's a question: are you painting models as well?
Yes, yeah, I am.
And do you enjoy that?
Yeah, I love it. I love the kind of, that's something that I was really into when I was a kid, like, painting Warhammer armies. And I love, Craig can currently see over my shoulder the silhouette of a load of ranked up kind of Napoleonic figures over here. But
cool.
I love that. It's nice to have a kind of a creative expression that's distinct from my job, I think.
Yes.
Which is really good. I think I really like the sense of humor about it, where it is this like kind of grim universe, but you also have things like, the game has special characters like you would in like Warhammer 40,000, but it's just like ridiculous stuff. Like there's one called Todd, who's like this horrible little toad mutant who you can get to like lead your army, and he like flips the results of all the combats you're in and things like that. It's ridiculous. I love it. It's really speaks to me. It's very like Python-esque, very kind of like grim, kind of pessimistic British humor, which I really enjoy.
So a couple things. One, like, this is amazing. And you do a very good, I don't know if you realize this, but you're very good at distilling down the pitch. You've now done it twice. You've done it for your game, and you just did a phenomenal job of doing it for this other game. Because I know nothing about it. Now I feel like I totally understand both what I'm going to look forward to in the solo game as well as this game. Have you ever come across Mike Hutchinson's work? He's the gentleman that he's in your part of the world, Gaslands.
Yes. So I heard your interview with him about Hobgoblin this last year. I've got the Hobgoblin starter rules, and I briefly met him at Dragon Meet, which is a convention in December, and I shook his hand and thanked him for producing Hobgoblin, because I think it's the most wonderful rank and flank rules set. It's exactly what I want from a fantasy game.
Yeah, he is, in my opinion, the designer in the miniature space that we're going to be talking about 20 years from now. I don't think we understand how influential he is right now. Like Gaslands was a huge hit. Well, if you listen to that interview, then you know my obsession with A Billion Suns. And just go buy it. And if you think it's shit, I'll pay you back. I think that like Hobgoblin blew my mind, but there's things that he's doing in A Billion Suns that I think you would get a kick out of. And one of the things that made me think of it, and this is what made me think of Hutchinson in general, is he doesn't produce models, right? So you get to really do what you're doing with your Napoleon things. You do the same thing with Billion Suns. There's a million spaceship models that are out there. You can grab any of them and play this game. So that's absolutely fantastic. Dude, I didn't know you were into the minis. That makes me excited.
Yeah, I mean, after this, I can send you some pics of just like all the weird stuff. At a Turnip convention a couple of weeks ago, I won a little trophy for having the coolest general. I've got this little trophy made out of a champagne cork with the little like Napoleonic hat.
Unbelievable.
Glued to the top with mud. It's very fitting in the game. But yeah, I love it so
cool.
much.
Do you have any of the models on your Instagram?
Yeah, not on my Instagram, but I've definitely been thinking of creating an Instagram for minis. I'm just starting my new Turnip 28 army, which is the Knights of Saint Aubergenius, which is just like a American listeners eggplant themed chivalric militant order, just like these idiots with aubergines on their heads.
Oh my god, that's amazing. I love the sense of humor. Holy cow, Ben, there is a lot of really cool things like painting miniatures that you could do on a Sunday afternoon, but somehow you allowed me to talk you into coming on and spending time with me. I want you to know how much I appreciate that.
No, it's cool, man. This has been great. It's been lovely to chat to you.
I'm glad. And for those of you listening, this is the end. You made it. I appreciate you listening. Take care. Big thank you to Ben for this talk. You can find out more about his game Ironheart on BackerKit. Have you tried a solo RPG yet? If so, which one? And if not, why? I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Please share your thoughts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky, or email me at admin@thirdfloorwars.com. Your voice matters, and all those links in the show notes are there for you. Please take a minute to rate, review, and share this podcast. Word of mouth is the key to growing tabletop talk. You don't want to miss the next episode. I talk with Sam Dunwald about his podcast, Dice Exploder. Happy gaming, friend. Remember what Salvador Dali once said, have no fear of perfection. You'll never reach it. So don't fear and go make. That was perfect. Perfect segment.
Amazing. Great. Thank you.
That's exactly what the show is. Go ahead.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. I was going to say, this is very exciting. We've got a very new project that I'm working on that isn't Shiver for Parable Games, which is the first time I'll ever talk about this, which is dramatically different, but is being published by Parable Games. So this will be a very cool thing.
We'll roll into
about.
that. Let me just put it here so I don't forget. What's next?
No, that was really good. I was really nervous before this, so thank you for being such a good host. So glad you guided me through it.
One of my biggest things is to try to forget that we're being recorded. If I can just get us two idiots talking about playing games, the better off we are. All right,
too true.
I'll bring us back. Dude, you're super kind for sending that to me. That is badass.
Thank you. I hope that's I'm sure Charlie and Brian will be fine with me sending that.
I'm not gonna share it.
That'll be chill.
Yeah.
No.
Yep. And if they would prefer us to suppress this segment where we talked about it, just tell me. So just shoot a note.
No, it's fine. I asked them earlier if this was cool to talk about, and they said, "Hey, okay, so it's fine.
Perfect.
Just leave it in." So I feel like I rambled quite a lot in that segment, but it's getting.
Here's what you got to remember, Ben. That's my job to worry about, right? Like, and there's times where I've pushed you back in, but I've tried to be very subtle about it. So you don't be self-conscious. I have kept you super interesting. Don't worry. And when and when I hip check you a little bit and bring you back in, I've done that. But you've been kicking ass. This has been a great segment. All right. So the idea here is not what do you make, what do you consume, and what I really want to focus on, Ben, is something somewhat recently that has just taken over your life a little bit. So even when you're not reading it, watching it, playing it, you're thinking about it. All of us have those types of things. So that's kind of what I want to get into. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, great. I'll bring us back.
Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.